Welcome to Sword, Sorcery, and Synthesizers, the 80s fantasy movie podcast. My name's Ben Orchard. I'm coming to you from Adelaide.
And I'm Claire Fitzpatrick, and I'm coming to you from Brisbane.
What normally happens on this show is that we talk over the phone every now and then about some fantasy movie from the 80s and sort of try to unpack what's the key to its enduring appeal. But every now and then we do an episode like this where we just talk about general trends in cinema that only
Mhm.
touch upon the 80s fantasy genre indirectly. We've done one such episode before where we talked about our favorite soundtrack albums, many of which, at least on my part, were from 80s fantasy films.
Mm.
And today, Claire, I'd like
Yeah.
to talk about the trend of 80s intellectual properties being remade or getting sequels, prequels, or reboots in the 21st century.
hmm Which is, something that we've spoken so much about. So it's, a topic that both of us are really interested in.
Well, a lot of people have asked me, why did you want to do a podcast about 80s fantasy movies? And one of the things I said to them was, I've noticed that a lot of 80s IPs are getting resurrected or have been resurrected over the last decade or so. Yeah. And a lot of these have been fantasy or science fiction. And it got me thinking, should I revisit the originals and see, what's the key to their appeal? Is it just nostalgia? Is it something deeper than that? Why are all these things from my childhood making a comeback?
Hmm.
Something that's made me sort of scratch my head a few times, looking over some of the titles that have made a comeback or, have continued to endure over the years.
Hmm. It's interesting because what a lot of fans are interested in, it's not always the same with directors and like Hollywood and what they think they can make a profit from.
Hmm.
And you have all these kind of cult classics, and they're largely left untouched. And then you have something completely random that is remade, and it's like, why? Like, what is it about this that means it needs to be like redeveloped in another form? Now.
Do you want me to give you, I guess, I don't know, an idealistic answer to that or a cynical answer to that? Because I
Idealistic
have a
and cynical.
I have a few theories. I think it might just be a kind of business model in the sense
Mm,
films are getting more expensive to make. And anytime you make a film, it's a high risk venture. You're investing millions of dollars in something that, no matter what the quality of it is, it's not guaranteed to turn a profit.
yeah.
People forget that a lot of films that are considered classics these days and got a lot of critical acclaim didn't actually make money at the box office on their initial release. The
Mm,
examples that spring to my mind immediately are Blade Runner and The Shawshank Redemption, both of which were box office disappointments on their original release. And
mm,
it's only over time with, home video and television that they came to be acknowledged as, classics. When a film is as well made as those two films are, and it still doesn't make money, you realize how any kind of investment in, entertainment is such a risk. I think with remakes and sequels, the producers probably think, well, there's a built-in audience for this. And if people came to see this concept in droves once before, then they'll probably come and see it again, or at least a fair amount of people will.
yeah. And I understand that, and I totally get why you would do that from a financial point of view. However, it does surprise me because if a certain genre of a film works, let's say Star Wars, right? Everybody knows about Star Wars and that, spawned several movies, so much merchandise, TV show, just everything. So why can't they sort of look at another book series that is sort of similar? not similar enough, but similar in a way, and then adapt that. So it's interesting that they choose to remake existing, films instead of, like, creating original films, but based on existing ideas that they know everybody already likes.
Well, a lot of beloved films from the 80s, like, they happened because the creators of those films had that kind of mentality. Like,
Mm,
for instance, a fantasy film from the 80s called Willow, which is very sort of Tolkien-esque in its structure and in its characterization. Like,
mm.
George Lucas, the sort of co-writer producer of that film, really liked Lord of the Rings, but instead of just adapting Lord of the Rings, he did his own fantasy saga that was kind of similar to Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Another thing that George Lucas worked on was the Indiana Jones series. I mean, Indiana Jones is not the first sort of adventure story about a treasure hunter.
Mm,
And there are many much older stories. King Solomon's Mines by H. Rider Haggard springs to mind as like a classic example of the sort of Indiana Jones formula before there was Indiana Jones.
mm.
But again, here's the thing. When George Lucas and Steven Spielberg made that film, they didn't just do another adaptation of King Solomon's Mines, which had been adapted to film before. They did Indiana Jones. They did a character that was similar, a situation that was similar.
Yeah, and I think that's really good because it acknowledges that people already like this story and people already like these characters. So instead of just redoing it, it's sort of, I don't think piggybacking is the word, but it reflecting upon characters that people like. So why wouldn't you expand upon this and make your own original story and your own original characters? And people always like the adventurer, the hero. Indiana Jones is the hero. He gets the ladies who, you know, um, he saves the world from getting, all these artifacts.
Well, it's funny you mentioned getting the ladies. Like,
Mm,
Steven Spielberg, the director of that film, he expressed a frustration that he wanted to direct a James Bond film, but
mm,
the producers of the James Bond series wouldn't hire him. And, he thought after some persuasion from his friend George Lucas, "Well, why don't you do your own action adventure story that has some sort of similarities to James Bond?" And in the third movie, he actually got, like, Sean Connery, who had played James Bond, to play the dad of Indiana Jones.
mm.
So it sort of he sort of got his wish of, like, being able to direct an action adventure story.
Yeah,
But
sort of like a minor crossover.
yeah, but another example of what you're talking about that's more modern is, the TV series Stranger Things, which
Mhm,
is very obviously inspired by the works of Stephen King,
mm,
H.P. Lovecraft,
mhm,
and, various sort of films from the '80s like The Goonies. But
mm.
it's not a direct adaptation. It's more like they took tropes from various stories and then, blended them together and came up with something that's kind of similar, but, not a direct adaptation.
Yeah, it's kinda like It meets Goonies meets, yeah, H.P. Lovecraft. It's, um, yeah, like, science experiment, and I actually really like it because it's the only show that I can think of that I would describe as inherently speculative. So we've spoken about in the past of speculative fiction being like elements of horror, fantasy, sci-fi, even romance, in a way. And when I first watched Stranger Things, I thought this has everything. It has the horror, it has the sci-fi, it has the fantasy, it has, the romance. And I think that was a really great way to show modern audiences that these kind of tropes and ideas have always, existed, especially in 80s fantasy. Yeah, I liked that, and I'm hoping that people enjoyed it. They went and looked at 80s fantasy films and explored that.
Well,
Hopefully.
well, it certainly gave a boost to a lot of '80s pop music. I know that it
Yeah.
caused, Kate Bush's song "Running Up That Hill" to re-enter the charts.
Mm,
It had been featured in an episode of Stranger Things.
mhm,
The thing about this this kind of storytelling, though, is that it's tricky to come up with a recognizable brand for marketing purposes.
Mm.
I think that's why studios lean more towards, remaking or adapting something directly because it has that, that branding element to it. I
Yeah.
I actually did some research, uh, well, sort of, very, very lazy research to see how, like, widespread this trend is.
Mm.
I asked ChatGPT to give me the, top 10 highest grossing films of the last decade,
Mhm.
gave me a list, and I also asked it to give me the 10 highest grossing movies of the '80s.
Mhm.
And keep in mind this is ChatGPT, like, I know, these AI programs sometimes make mistakes, um, but anyway, the the list of the top 10 highest grossing films of the last decade it came up with, 9 of them were sequels, and
Mhm.
1 was a remake.
Mm.
The films were Avengers: Endgame, Avatar: The Way of Water, Star Wars: The Force Awakens, Avengers: Infinity War, Spider-Man: No Way Home, Jurassic World, The Lion King remake, Furious 7, Frozen 2, and Avengers: Age of Ultron.
Mm.
Now, just to compare that to the '80s list, the
Mhm.
'80s top 10 highest grossing movies, there was 5 original screenplays, 3 sequels, 1 film adapted from a book, and
Mhm.
1 that could be considered a kind of soft reboot or remake.
Mm.
So, the one that was adapted from a book was Who Framed Roger Rabbit. The one that was I guess you could call it a reboot, was the 1989 Batman film that Tim Burton directed.
Mhm.
The 3 sequels were Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, and Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. The 5 original screenplays were E.T., Rain Man, Back to the Future, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and Top Gun.
Interesting. Yeah, that are very popular.
But, yeah, actually E.T., an original screenplay, was number 1.
Hmm. That is so weird because I could not picture that being number one now, or something that is similar to that because it's just not something that is sort of explored in, I guess, modern cinema. Um,
Well,
Nothing that I can think of.
I am most shocked that Rain Man was number 5 at the box office in the '80s. Like, of all the
Hmm.
that's the 5th most successful mall, because it's a road movie, and it's mostly an intimate story about, the relationship between 2 brothers. Uh,
Hmm.
I know that film gets a lot of flack these days for boosting stereotypes about autistic people, but
Hmm.
for its time, depicting an autistic person as the main character and depicting them sympathetically was actually going out on a limb. So
Yeah.
I really I am really surprised it was so successful as that, and
Yeah.
I don't think a film like that would be so successful today. It just wouldn't.
Yeah, and I think, it's interesting because, yeah, that's a topic that wasn't really explored back then, and it wasn't really something that we spoke about a lot. And now, yeah, with autism, we figure a lot. Like my older daughter is autistic. I think I mentioned that in the podcast before. But it's interesting that that's something that was really popular. And I find it just curious, like such a change that we have with films now. You know, there's so much animation actually, which is so completely different. Yeah. So yeah, like so there seems to be like such a diverse kind of range of films in the 80s, and I don't know if it's as diverse now. And I'm not saying diverse as in the people who are the actors. I
I
mean
know
more about
I know what you
yeah, yeah, storyline, themes. Yeah.
you're talking about genre diversity. I think
Yeah.
one of the major differences in terms of '80s cinema, at least in Hollywood, is that a lot of people talk about the '80s as the age of high concept cinema. And
Mm.
I take that to mean that originality was used as a marketing hook. Like,
Mhm.
come and see this movie because it's nothing like you've seen before. And also, back then, a lot of the time, movie stars were the hook. Yeah.
Yeah.
The attraction was come and see your favorite star in something. Actors, you know, of course, there's still big movie stars out there, but they're not, the focus of marketing in the same way that they were back then. I
Mm.
mentioned I mentioned in an earlier episode that we did on Field of Dreams how I didn't think that movie would be made today because it's such an outlandish concept, first of all. But the whole selling point of that movie seemed to be, "Come and see this weird movie because it's like nothing else." And and also because it's got Kevin Costner in it, who was a big star at the time, but, like, the marketing was so focused on him, like, the poster is just Kevin Costner standing in a field or
Mm.
Kevin Costner standing on a baseball diamond, and, like, the poster tells you pretty much nothing about the movie except, it's got Kevin Costner in it and baseball figures somewhere.
Mm. Which is interesting that because when we discussed it, we were saying about all the kind of elusive, speculative elements of it. And perhaps people didn't want to kind of expand on that in like marketing. It's like this is just a straightforward Kevin Costner baseball movie, not the actual full kind of backstory into the movie or anything like that.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I think people who went in there expecting a typical baseball movie with Kevin Costner were in for quite a shock.
Yeah.
And maybe and
Yeah.
maybe that was the key to the film's success, like, people went in expecting that, and then they got something else and were blown away, and like, the word of mouth spread after that, people telling their friends, "Oh, you've gotta see this, it is so weird and so different." Uh,
Mm.
maybe, I don't know, but the point I was trying to make was just, yeah, I think the originality was the hook.
Yeah.
The idea of you've gotta come out to the movies to see this because it it'll, take you away to another world, a totally
Mm.
different experience, whereas modern films are marketed based on the comfort of recognition, a sort of
Yeah.
comforting reassurance of, like, I don't know, visiting old friends in a way, if your old friends happen to be, like, superheroes in, brightly colored tights or something.
Mm. And I find it interesting because, you know, both of us grew up in different kind of eras. You were in the 80s, in the 90s, but during that time, there was so much creativity, unique, original ideas. In the 90s, I remember so many films that were so different from each other. And I feel like even now, films just aren't made like that anymore. Um, a lot of, I think, 80s, 90s, a lot of like children adventure films and movies that I watched. Um, and yeah, that just doesn't exist. And it, which is weird because I feel like they could say, come revisit your youth, as like a hook or a tagline.
Sure. I should point out that I think these films are still getting made on a lower budget in Europe, in Asia, in Australia for that matter. I think
Mm,
it's more a Hollywood problem that we're talking about.
yeah.
And unfortunately, Hollywood, being Hollywood, they have the most money to splash around when it comes to marketing. So
Mm,
even even the most sort of, I don't know, sloppily made blockbuster that comes out of Hollywood has a huge advertising push behind it.
I was watching the film, kind of loosely. I was at my boyfriend's house and he has a bunch of housemates, and I can't actually think of what it's called. It was about had John Cena in it, and they were trying to save the president. Like the plane was being blown up, everything like that. And I just thought it was so silly. And it was this Hollywood blockbuster. They must have put so much money into it. All these things being blown up, explosions. And I watched the movie and it was pretty ridiculous. It had no original ideas at all. It was a very, this is not me being anti American, but a lot of very pro American films that exist of Save a Day, Save America. And I thought, this is not original, This is not this is something that's been done so many times. Why is all this money being used on unoriginal films? and maybe that's me being petty, but I was like, this money could be spent making so many other highly original films.
When we did the previous episode on Nightbreed and you asked me, like, how would you like to see a continuation of Nightbreed made? And I said, I'd like an animated TV series because I think it could be made on a low budget and
Mm,
look good in the medium of animation. And I thought, well, the reason I said that instead of saying, like, why not a huge, big budget, series that's live action is because I doubt that Hollywood would take the risk on such material these days. Whereas I feel that
mm,
like small animation studios and are more likely to take a risk on these sort of things. I mean, you mentioned children's adventure stories. That
mm.
that sort of thing is still being made quite often in Japan in the anime medium. I'm
That's what I
thinking
was thinking.
I'm thinking of
Yeah.
recent like, Miyazaki film, The Boy and the Heron,
Mm,
or even some of the, like, films that some of his protégés have made over the last decade.
mhm.
But, yeah, that sort of thing doesn't get made in Hollywood, certainly not with the same sort of marketing push behind it.
Yeah, it seems more of like an Eastern kind of thing. And then in the West, it's like all big budget Hollywood, and in the East, it's sort of, focusing on storytelling and yeah, which is something that I just think has sort of been not forgotten here, but just kind of pushed aside. Like that's not the main focus. Storytelling doesn't seem to be the main focus in films anymore.
Although if such a story was associated with a brand, I think that there would be, you know, a chance that it might get, remade by a major American studio, especially Disney, who seems to be on a run with remaking a lot of their old animated classics as
Mm,
action stories.
yeah.
To very mixed results, if I may put it mildly.
Yeah. Um, Early in the year, I actually went to a Disney exhibition at my local museum. Um, and I took my kids along, and it was really cool. It kind of it was a kind of tour of like the history of Disney and all the original films they did. And then it went to, I guess, maybe like 2004, 2008, and then it started being remakes, and it started being different types of animation and different types of story being told. And I just thought it's just not as original. Well, there are some original ideas, but it just felt like there was just lacking something. It's like they're pumping out so many movies, and there seems to be a lot more space between earlier films, especially with animation being more difficult then. Now it seems like Disney just puts out film after film after film, and there's not really any breathing space. And I just think, oh, another Disney film, and I don't get to sit down and, anticipate it and think, "I'm gonna watch it with my kids." It's just one more Disney film that they're just popping out. Maybe I'm just being cynical.
It's hard not to be cynical when
Mm,
see a company that, takes such an assembly line attitude to product. I mean,
mm,
I knew that once Disney acquired the rights to Star Wars that there would be, you know, much more sort of in a way, I knew that there'd be more movies coming out because they'd need to exist, if only as a commercial for the toys and other
mm,
merchandise that, because here's the thing, if anyone can outdo George Lucas when it comes to merchandising, it's Disney.
yeah,
Yeah.
and
And, like
also
and, like, Star Wars was already like a merchandising giant, but
yeah.
before Disney took over, but then, oh boy, once they got their mitts on it, you just knew that, yeah,
Mm,
they'd keep churning out product.
yeah, and we should expect this. Disney's been doing this for decades. Like, I remember when McDonald's was more popular as a family kind of restaurant, you'd get Happy Meals, and there are all these Disney kind of toys, and I remember getting, like, Hunchback of Notre Dame figures,
Uh,
which is my favorite Disney film, by the way.
I
And
I really love it too, and that I really love Hunchback of Notre Dame too, and that's like a neat
mm,
segue into something I was going to ask you actually.
yeah,
I've thought about this, and I've thought like, what are some intellectual properties I would actually like to see remade, or I'd like to
mm,
get some kind of follow-up or sequel or resurrection or whatever. And I
Yeah.
noticed that Disney have this tendency to, like, remake all of their animated classics, things like Beauty and the Beast and Little Mermaid and Lion King have been
Mm.
made. Like, pretty much all of the Aladdin as well, like, the Mulan, all
Mhm.
90s Disney animated films that I grew up with as a kid, except The Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Yeah.
And, like,
Mm.
that's something that I think might actually work as a live action piece because it is a more grounded story. It is, in some ways, darker and more adult. And
Mhm.
the thing is, there was a stage adaptation of the Disney movie. And
Mm.
what happened was the songwriters, Alan Menken and Stephen Schwartz, who worked on the original movie, they came up with a stage version that retained the songs from the original Disney film, but they
Mm.
changed script so it was darker and more faithful to Victor Hugo's novel.
Yeah.
The stage version is actually quite impressive. It's intelligent. It sort of fixes a lot of the I know inconsistencies in tone that exist in the original animated film. And
Mm.
I think that if they did a live action film that drew inspiration from the stage musical version of Hunchback of Notre Dame, I think that would be really awesome, frankly.
Yeah, me too. And it's actually been on my mind recently because I know I watched it again with my 2-year-old daughter. Okay, she's
Gotta get
2.
him young.
I don't
Get him young.
think I don't think she's going to be terrified of it, but she was pretty enraptured. Like she'd walk off and then come back and like look at the colors and she'd point at things and she'd point at the gargoyles and she'd laugh at them. It was more something because I thought, what's something I can watch, but she can sort of watch as well, and it's going to be not like I don't know inappropriate in a way. And then I was thinking, okay, animation. And so I looked on, Disney Plus and looked through it and I thought, and then I just saw it and I thought, yes, Hunchback, I haven't done this in ages. I love this. And I think also because I'm doing my PhD on like the female Gothic, and then I was thinking, beautiful Gothic architecture in the movie. It's just absolutely sublime. It's gorgeous. And then I actually thought, what if there was a remake of this? But then I was like, would this be good? Like, how dark would it be? Or would it be lighter? Because it's a very dark film.
I think
Um, yeah.
it is dark, but it doesn't fully commit. I think that it has.
Yeah.
I like the film overall, but I think it has some sort of misguided moments of comic relief that really don't land.
Yeah.
And I think that the stage version fixed those problems. So
Mm.
again, I think that if they adapted it to film and they drew
Mm.
inspiration from the stage adaptation of Hunchback of Notre Dame, and they got someone who was a director who had experience with both films and Broadway musicals, someone like,
Mm.
I'd say Nicholas Hypner, who did, The Madness of King George and, like, a few other, like, big Broadway musicals like Miss Saigon as well.
Mm.
Someone who has, like, experience with both theater and film, it would actually be a really interesting movie. I'm not sure the Disney Corporation in its current, like, management model would, go for something so risky. I think that's probably why, they'd rather do, like, a live action version of Moana or something because that is
Yeah.
more safe, or, like, a recently they did a remake of Lilo and Stitch, um,
Really?
or Snow White as well. I mean, it's the
Yeah.
it's the safe choices, like, go with something that was a hit before.
Yeah. Although there's much to be said about the reinterpretation of Snow White, but we won't go into that. But then I thought, why are they doing this again when there's so many other things they could do? There's so many other books, like, Brothers Grimm stories that they could focus on.
I agree
Why redo Snow White?
I
Mm.
agree, but I'm trying
Yeah.
to, like, make sure that we don't come across as, like, negative Nellies for the whole thing. I just mentioned Hunchback as an example of something I'd like to see re
Yeah,
remade
me
or
too.
resurrected. Is there anything else that you can think of where, like, "Oh, it would be good if the current remake trend, picked up this"?
I have something in mind, but it's not Disney. So, Anastasia. I think it came out in '97. the animated film, a fictionalized version of the lost Princess Anastasia Romanov. Um, and, the entire Romanov family were basically massacred in the Russian Revolution. And
So,
I thought,
yes, so it's a fantasy, basically.
yeah, it's a
The
fantasy version.
vibe.
Yeah, and yeah, because there is, obviously Anastasia, the youngest child, was suspectedly also murdered, but they couldn't quite identify her remains. As grisly as that is, it did open up for I think people to think, okay, what happened to this person? And then I think it's such an odd concept for a children's film, but I love it. It works so well. It's about, adventure, identity, and I'd love it if maybe there was a remake of that. Although I still love the artistic style back then, but because it's not Disney, you know?
The film you were thinking of, Anastasia, it was by Don Bluth, a former Disney animator who went off and did his own films. The Secret
Mm,
Team and An American Tale among the most famous ones. But the thing is, Anastasia was actually adapted for the stage. And
mm,
just like with the stage adaptation of Hunchback of Notre Dame, what they did was they came up with a more adult version. They
mm,
they kept the songs, but they basically rewrote the script. So
yeah,
it was a bit more, I wouldn't say realistic, but the drama was more grounded and
mm,
the characters were more psychologically complex.
mhm,
I think if there was a kind of recursive adaptation where they did a live action film that was based on the stage musical version of Anastasia, again,
mm,
it would be, something quite special. And yeah,
mm,
it's a pity that I don't know. The stage version was a hit, I believe.
yeah,
So
mm,
maybe they'd see some sort of potential profit in this.
yeah.
But
I just think, yeah, it's something that I love, and I know a lot of people my age, or a lot of female friends, like when I mentioned it, or when it just pops up, it's like, oh, I love that, and you get that kind of nostalgic expression for it,
hmm,
and it's it seems to me that it's one of those films that is quite beloved, but it's just sort of like fallen under the radar in a bit. Not in the way that it's become like a lost film, like people know what it is, but I have found it interesting that that's not something that's been remade because I think that it's, that would be cool to be a remake. But again, I don't, it'd have to be a good remake. I don't want it to, I don't think it would like ruin the original in any way, but the original is it's so beautiful. It's so clever and funny and poignant. And I think a remake would have to be done pretty right and also a bit more respectful in a way. Current economic, political climate, blah, blah, blah. Do you think you know what I mean? I think
do you mean it would have to be more respectful of the hardships faced by the Russian people at that
yeah, and
and in that period of time that the story takes place? Well, that was one of the things that the stage version actually emphasized.
yeah.
I think, as I said, if they adapted the Broadway version of Anastasia to the screen, like
Mm.
I know that sounds weird, like an adaptation of an adaptation,
Yeah,
which in itself was loosely based on a true story. Uh,
yeah,
it it's a recursive adaptation, but it would still work, I think.
yeah.
I was going to ask you if there's anything that stands out for you as, like, a success story. Like, if there's one particularly good remake or sequel that happened as part of this trend that you think, "Well, I'm not really on board with this trend, but at least this thing
Mm.
the result of it."
I've got to think of it.
I've got one.
Yeah. What
Uh,
would you think?
well, one thing that really impressed me was the Netflix series, The Dark Crystal: Age of Resistance,
Mm,
which was a I guess a prequel to the Dark Crystal, a 80s fantasy film by Jim Henson and Frank Oz,
mm,
which in which basically all of the characters were puppets, and
yeah.
it was a very sort of, dark, uh, heroic fantasy story. It's a film that has a very rich world visually, but a lot of the mythology in terms of the history of the world and the background to the characters, you know, isn't fleshed out that well. It's kind of just
Mm.
it's just
Yeah.
subtle allusions are made to the background of various things and various people.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of scope for a prequel to really flesh that out, and that's exactly what they did with the Netflix series.
Mm.
Got like I can't remember how many episodes, but like 10 episodes, like or something like that, to
Mm.
really go into a lot of detail about the history of this world. And it was made by Jim Henson's family, who
Mhm.
are also quite accomplished puppeteers in their own right. And yeah, visually it was consistent with the previous film.
Mm.
In some ways, I think it improved upon it because it featured more morally ambiguous characters. Like,
Yeah.
it featured protagonists who had flaws, it featured antagonists who had a certain charisma or who were, um, had some redeeming features. Whereas, yeah, the original film is pretty black and white, good versus evil stuff.
Mm.
And, yeah, I was amazed by it, and I thought to myself, well, if one good thing came out of the remake trend, it was the Dark Crystal Age of Resistance.
Mm. Maybe they should do a series on Legend as like a remake to actually expand a lot. And you know, one of my criticisms was that I just wanted more background. Even though I really enjoyed it as a whole, I enjoyed it, as I said, visually, but I just wanted to know a bit more information. And you were saying how, the director's cut was much longer, but yeah, like if the Dark Crystal series can be made, why not something like Legend? Why not something um that
Well,
has so much more to give?
Well, I was surprised that The Dark Crystal ever got off the ground because the
Mm,
original film was a box office flop. It had
mm,
huge cult following these days. It has like tie-in comic books and merchandising, but in the 80s when it was made, it wasn't a huge hit. I mean,
mm,
I guess it broke even at the box office, but it wasn't like hugely celebrated and it got some pretty bad reviews from a lot of critics, actually. And it
mm,
was the same with Jim Henson's follow-up fantasy movie, Labyrinth. It wasn't a hit. It just became something with this huge cult following afterwards. And
mm,
I've heard rumors that, a Labyrinth sequel is in the works, and rumors that a new Never-Ending Story movie is in the works.
mm.
And I'm not sure how I feel about that. Um,
Yeah.
All right. All right. Here's
Mm,
what I think. I think with Labyrinth, the original movie is so self-contained. I don't really feel that there's any need for, a
mm,
sequel. And especially now, I mean, Jennifer Connelly is still around and she's really matured as an actress, but David Bowie is sadly no longer with us. And I'm not sure, like, without him, it would be the same. And as for Neverending Story, we said before on the podcast on that episode that when we covered that movie, the movie is good, but it's not a faithful adaptation of the novel.
yeah.
It's only based on the first half of it. And a lot of that was a pragmatic decision because just like the special effects technology didn't exist at the time to do some of the things that are described in the book. And, you know, also it would be a bit long. But I think
Mm.
you could make a faithful, like, 3-hour movie adaptation of the book today.
Yeah.
So if the Neverending Story film that's supposedly in development, if the plan is to do a faithful adaptation of the book, I think that would be a worthy enterprise, but if all they wanna do is, like, remake the '80s film, I think that's pointless.
See, I have, suspicions that they're just gonna remake the Ed film, and I don't understand why they don't do a mini series, even like, I don't know, some kind of six-part series of the entire book. That would be a great adaptation because then it adapts everything, and it introduces sorry. So it gives viewers of the original film the story they already know, and even if they've never read the book, they're already familiar with this. as I was saying, the familiar with the characters, but then the second half, it would be the second half of the book. So it would allow them to be exposed to the rest of the original story. So I
Mhm.
think that would be a great way to merge both the original film and then the second half of the book together because, again, a lot of people don't know that it was based on a novel at all, or that there is basically a whole second half of the novel that isn't covered. So that would be great. Like, mini-series of the entire book, I guess. Or even, 2 seasons, you know?
I'm reluctant to think about stretching it out quite that far. I
Mm.
think I think, as I said, you could tell the whole story of the book in 3 hours. I think a mini series would probably be good in terms of, like, giving a little bit of extra space for the story. Uh,
Yeah.
your talk about stretching things out to a series, though, brings to mind something else, uh,
Mhm.
which I think is probably the most surprising example to me of an 80s IP that got resurrected and became a hit.
Handmaid's Tale?
Yeah, The Handmaid's Tale, because, of all the things you know, to make a comeback, like,
Mm.
first of all, I was surprised that they wanted to do another version at all, because the book itself is a very bleak dystopian parable, but also it features very graphic depictions of abuse, both physical and psychological.
Mm.
You know, rape and torture and references to genocide and ethnic cleansing and, other really horrific stuff. And
Yeah.
I was just well, first of all, I was amazed that, you know, they'd want to go there. I mean,
Mm.
also there was a film made of it in the '90s, which was a flop, which I have defended on multiple occasions, but never mind that. I was just, yeah, totally blown away that they did it at all. Then I was
Mm.
surprised that it turned out to be a hit. And then I was surprised that after they'd run out of material to adapt at the end of the first season, because it's quite a short book that Margaret Atwood wrote. It's quite a small, intimate character piece about
Mm.
ordinary people just trying to survive the 9 to 5 daily grind of, life in a fascist regime, basically. But
Mm.
after they'd run out of stuff to adapt, they just kept going. They
Yeah.
came up with whole seasons that were, effectively sequels to the book, and it became such a huge hit that there was sort of tie-in merchandising. You could get Handmaid's Tale Halloween costumes and Handmaid's Tale themed red wine. Uh,
Mhm.
like, I never thought that, of all things to become a franchise, The Handmaid's Tale.
See, I'm surprised it became a franchise. However, I am not actually surprised in this current political climate that it was remade, especially with in America because of, women's, lack of autonomy with the overruling of Roe versus Wade. And this is a very, very serious and contemporary issue that's happening now. So but I actually think it was, yeah, it was very bold because it's showing that, hey, we're not so different. Like, yes, women aren't being rounded up and forced to have babies, but a lot of women are forced to have children and children that's either born of rape or, sexual assault, or even if it's going to kill them, they are still forced to, they can't terminate a pregnancy. So when I started watching it, I thought, wow, this is very relevant. Maybe, I don't know, just that this is a woman, and I thought it was very interesting. But I do agree with you that it's interesting that they chose to adapt this novel that, yeah, like maybe back then it might have been like, oh, this is, dystopian, but now I think it was, yeah, incredibly relevant,
Well, I know
I
that
think.
well, I know that Trump is kind of nostalgic for the Reagan era.
Yeah.
And I think that Reagan once used "Make America Great Again" as, like, a campaign slogan as
Mm,
well,
I believe that.
and that became, like, a catchphrase for Donald Trump too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the thing that got me, though, was just the fact that, I don't know, just the first season of The Handmaid's Tale is, like, 10 hours long or something like that.
Mm.
You've got like the subsequent seasons. Like there's 6 seasons in total of this show. So
Mhm.
that's like over 40 hours of television devoted to a book that is quite small. Like it's more screen time than has been devoted to like any adaptation of Lord of the Rings,
Mm.
which is a much longer book. And
Yeah.
I felt after a while, like I respect the fact that they were very daring in taking on some big issues,
Mm.
but the handling of it left a bad taste in my mouth after a while because
Yeah.
I thought that they stretched it a bit thin.
Yeah.
What that I thought that they didn't need to keep going as long as they did, and I think maybe it became up to a certain point, we're gonna keep going because this is a success and we've got to milk the cash cow dry, uh,
Mhm.
just keep the franchise going.
Yeah. I agree.
But
Yeah.
also but also I think it crossed a line for me once the TV series started showing elaborate forms of torture and execution that aren't in the book.
Yeah.
Invented these new forms of violence. And
Mm.
a lot of them were presented in a very sensationalistic way. You know, the abuse being played out in slow motion and then like lots of long lingering close-ups on wounded bodies and things like that. And I thought, is this series starting to become an example of the exploitation that it's trying to condemn?
That's such an interesting idea because I agree. I think I got to like season 3, I thought, and I'm like, okay, I've had enough. And then I stopped watching it for a while, and then I ended up finishing off. Like I watched all the things that are out, and I thought, oh my god, it's gonna sound horrible, but I've just wasted all this time, and I just thought it's just too much. It's just gratuitous, sensationalized,
I
and I
must
feel like it's pushed past the point. It doesn't matter anymore. You know?
I must admit, I I stopped watching halfway through. I couldn't last as long as you did. Um,
Mm.
and I must confess another bias as well.
Mm.
I actually really admire the 90s movie that was made.
Yeah, that's good.
And I feel that the 90s movie was more true to the spirit, if not the letter of the novel in some ways.
Me
And
too.
I know I've said this to you before, and I promise I'll keep this brief. I won't talk about this for longer than 5 minutes, but if you let me talk about it now, I promise I'll never bring it up again. Um,
Okay.
I think that one thing that the TV series kind of missed the point of the book in one respect, in this
Mm.
that the book is about an ordinary person just trying to survive the 9 to 5 grind of living under a totalitarian system. And
Yeah.
she's grief-stricken, she's traumatized. She struggles just to get out of bed in the morning and not succumb to despair and kill herself. And
Mm.
so much of the book is about, trying to retain your sense of identity and just get through the day.
Yeah.
And the main character is very flawed. She's selfish and cowardly at times, but also she she's very hesitant about joining the resistance. And
Mm.
her acts of rebellion are small and personal and ultimately don't affect any sort of systemic change.
Mm.
And with the TV series, they changed that. They made the character into an active revolutionary who
Mhm.
joins up with the resistance at the first opportunity and does things that sort of rock the system. Like she helps out with, smuggling refugees out of the country and planting bombs and assassinations and things like that. That
Mm.
and ultimately she, escapes and gets to be a witness at war crimes tribunals and be a party to the execution of the people who oppressed her. And it's
Mm.
all very heroic and triumphant stuff. And that's the thing. With the 90s movie, it has like two big strikes against it. First of
Mm.
all, it had to drastically simplify the plot in order to, fit everything into 2 hours. And the second thing is that it tacked on a kind of happy ending to the piece.
Mm.
But in 3 ways, I think that it's more true to the spirit of the book. The first way is that they weren't trying to build a franchise from it. Uh, None of the, like, writers or directors of the movie had aspirations to do sequels, and there wasn't, like, tie-in merchandising. There wasn't, like, Handmaid's Tale action figures for the '90s movie. Um, the second thing I think the movie does right is it doesn't sensationalize the violence. It doesn't sort of escalate the violence beyond what's depicted in the book.
Yeah.
Was That movie was directed by Volker Schlöndorff, a German filmmaker who was born in the 1930s and sort of understood all too well how totalitarian regimes operate.
Yeah.
The violence in the film is much more realistic and sober, and I guess the attitude of the enforcers are different. It's more like brisk and businesslike, and they're disturbingly casual. It's treated like an ordinary day at the office, as
And
opposed
that's why yeah.
as
But
opposed to sort of the sadistic goons of the TV series.
yeah. And it's so interesting you mention that because and the word sadistic goon, because in the movie, they're not sadistic goons. It's creepy, that it's sinister because it's so normal.
Yeah.
Because in this totalitarian government, it's normal.
Well, yeah, I think the movie showed how, such systems can become normalized. Another thing that the movie was more faithful in depicting is that in the novel, the regime isn't just misogynist, it's also white supremacist. And
Yeah.
they're carrying out campaigns of ethnic cleansing, and all the main characters are Caucasian.
Mhm.
Whereas in the TV series, they cut out all the racist policies of the regime
Mm.
so that they could cast actors who were people of color in prominent roles. And I think that really undercut a lot of the horror of
Yeah.
the story as well. And again, Volker Schlöndorff being a German filmmaker, like, he really understood, how to depict institutionalized racism authentically. And
You think so? Yeah.
and I guess the final point is just that I felt it was more faithful in its depiction of the personalities of the characters,
Yeah.
especially the main character, who I think was played by Natasha Richardson in the movie in much more of a warts and all way. Like, she played the part with, an air of wounded melancholy and tender-hearted vulnerability, whereas
Mm.
Elizabeth Moss in the TV series plays her with sort of scowling defiance and righteous anger. And yeah, I feel that the movie better captured the idea that this character is just an ordinary person caught up in a bad situation, as opposed
Yeah.
as opposed to being a sort of heroic role model.
Yeah, and I think that is more of a faithful, adaptation to the novel because that's what I got out of the book. It was this is an ordinary woman trying to make it to the dates, and that's why I liked that the film was simplistic. It was not overly violent. It was showing just enough of the sinister aspects of this regime, where in the TV series, it just showed way too much, and it's not to say that, it can't handle violence. I watch, things with violence in it, but gratuitous violence for the sake of gratuitous violence, it just doesn't always work. And I think that, yeah, as you're saying, it takes away from the actual message and the importance of the story you're trying to tell. So I just don't think that it's actually a very good remake, which is weird because it's so successful as a franchise.
I think I think as a fan of the '90s movie as well, like, look, one thing I appreciated about Natasha Richardson's performance is that, like, I don't know, with her air of sort of, like, grief-stricken sadness, I could believe that someone living in a police state who conducted themselves the way Natasha Richardson does, would be overlooked or underestimated by the authorities.
Yeah.
Whereas with Elizabeth Moss, a lot of the scenes, like, she's glowering out from under lowered eyebrows or delivering her lines in a sarcastic tone of voice, and I just thought, someone so brazenly insubordinate as this,
Yeah.
I felt that, like, the cops in the show, l well, they came across as fools for not realizing she was trouble a lot earlier than they did.
Yeah, he was so suspicious. Incredibly suspicious person. And like literally the first season, I was like, come on, how can you not see this?
But yeah, I mean, I know that Elizabeth Moss's performance has got lots of acclaim and, she's
Mm,
got awards for it. And yeah, and Natasha Richardson basically got zip in the 90s. Uh,
mm,
but I was gonna say, comparing the 90s movie to the TV show, I feel like I'm the kid saying the emperor is wearing no clothes with regards to the TV show, but it's not just that.
mm.
It's like I'm saying the emperor is wearing no clothes, and that's like Elizabeth Moss, but like standing next to her on the same podium, there's like another emperor who's got a fabulous suit that no one's paying attention to, and
Yeah,
that's Natasha Richardson. But
yeah.
anyway, I'm
Mm.
I'm in the minority here. It was a huge.
No, I agree with you. We're both in the minority. And it's just, I just want people to at least watch the movie. And a lot of people don't even know there's a movie. And it's like, come on, like, expand your horizons. If you like The Handmaid's Tale so much, watch the movie, read the book.
Yeah,
No?
yeah, better yet, read the book.
Yeah.
I can say that at least one good thing came from the Handmaid's Tale attention is that I guess more people were aware of the book and
Yeah.
maybe the movie as well. Maybe they sought it out, they picked it up, and, like, it's a great book, it's a page turner, so I'm glad
Mm.
it it got some awareness because of that, and
Well,
sometimes when sometimes when things are remade and, the remake becomes popular, I'm thinking, well, at least maybe the original will get a boost.
yeah. Well, the thing is, I had never heard of it. I knew of Margaret Atwood, but I never actually read her novels. And it's weird, I've read so many things similar to her, but never read it. And then I think I watched the first season, and then I thought to myself, I saw based on, Margaret Atwood, and I was like, okay, I'm going to read it. And so I read the novel and I just devoured it within maybe 2 days. I think I was busy, so I had to stop reading it. And I thought, this is amazing. And so for me, like it introduced me to the book. So I liked that. But then it showed me that, the book is far superior, in my opinion and your opinion. So I was glad that it gave more attention to the book. I just
Well,
think.
on a more positive note, like doing justice to a book, I
Yeah.
I think that the more recent sort of film adaptations of Dune, like, they managed to sort of do justice to the book, and they were driven, not by a cash grab mentality, but with the idea that we can do justice to the book now. Because
Yeah.
Frank Herbert's book is a very long, complex book that also features some very, I don't know, spectacular vistas, very, you know, scenes that require elaborate special effects, put it that way.
Yeah.
And there were 2 adaptations, like, before this. There was the '80s movie version where, David Lynch, the poor man, was instructed, like, "You have to get this done in under 3 hours." And it's a doorstopper of a book, so he was given an impossible task to start with, and was just out of his depth directing a blockbuster anyway. And
Missed
I
its
planned
work. I couldn't watch it.
well, yeah, I planned to do an episode,
Mm,
future on Dune with my brother because he's a fan.
yeah.
I will spare you that, but, um, there
I wanted to watch it. I wanted to like it.
there was also a TV miniseries made in the early 2000s of Dune starring William Hurt, and that was long enough to cover the whole story, but the problem was it had a pretty low budget.
Mm,
It was high for a TV miniseries of its time, but it was, like, low compared to a movie, and
yeah.
the special effects in some scenes just aren't that great. But with the, like, two-part modern Dune adaptation, what they could do was they had the, because it's in 2 parts, they had the screen time to tell the whole story, but they also had the money to pull off, like, all the effects required.
Hmm. Do you think perhaps that's another reason why there are so many remakes? Because they have special effects now and they can make things more, I guess, realistic in a way where it was more obvious in the 80s and even before then and in the 90s that the special effects weren't as good?
I've heard that with regards to the Marvel cinematic universe and the DC cinematic universe and just superhero movies in general. That
Mm.
one of the reasons we're seeing so many of them these days is because now is the time they can be made.
Mm.
Whereas in the 80s and 90s, a lot of like compromises had to be made just in terms of like what was achievable on a budget.
And I think that's also something that we've touched upon in other films of where it may have been a lower budget, but it's still a really good movie. And I think there are certain things that we've said, if there was more of a budget, it would have been, much more better. But just because it wasn't a big budget doesn't mean that it wasn't a good movie. It's just didn't happen, there wasn't the budget and there wasn't actually the special effects at the time.
Sure. So yeah, I guess I guess it's something of a mixed bag, this current trend. In conclusion, I guess we can draw from this. I think
Yeah.
there is a lot of potential to sort of, I guess, redeem certain stories that are troubled, but there's also, I guess, a lot of the time it's just a cash in.
Yeah. I think so as well, and that's so disappointing because it means it's telling the same story again and again and again, and these are classic stories, but there are so many other stories that can and should be told, and I think that's just so disappointing, and it's great, we mentioned Studio Ghibli, that they tell new stories, but, I just wish it was more like that in, like, Hollywood and bigger budget productions. It would be, yeah, much better.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the key to sort of my nostalgia for the 80s is just, again, that high concept way of thinking where
Yeah.
Hollywood was throwing money at original ideas. You know, they weren't always
Yeah.
good ideas, but at least they
Mhm.
were something a bit different. And
Yeah.
we'll see how things pan out. I mean, maybe enough people will become cynical about this business model over time, and we'll go back to a high concept, style. Or
Mm.
maybe I'm just like, because the thing is, like, I'm old, so I remember all the old stuff, but a lot of younger people don't, and like the remake is their introduction to the story. So maybe I'm just like an old man shaking his walking stick at clouds again.
No, I had the same, fondness for the 90s movies as well, and I think if there were remakes of, let's say, well, My Girl, which I really love that movie, I think that would be weird, but I think I'd always hold on to that nostalgia of the original movie. But it would be great for them to showcase that to people now, but again, it's just not necessary. So I totally understand why you're like, old man shakes this at clown, because I feel the same way. Like, leave my movies alone. Just leave it alone.
Uh, okay, on that note, I guess we'll sign off. Leave our movies alone and come up with some original Hollywood. But yeah,
Exactly.
from our voice to the stars. There we go. All right. Cheerio, Claire.
Bye.